visualize things, and we're compulsive list makers. So ranking and the use of metrics such as analytics, WAR, something we cite a lot, is something that helps us in our arguments. But no, I agree with you. Some people come from different schools of thought. That's why a lot of people think Dusty Baker will be good for the Houston Astros if he was recently just interviewed with them. So, I mean, we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, too. The managerial job by the Mets was filled with an internal candidate that figures to get along the current crop of players. We'll see whether Brody Van Hageman goes out there, or whatever you call him. Wagaman, Hageman, whatever. Haggles with these guys the way he belittled Mickey Callaway a year ago. I'll be curious to see whether he's a weak link, since he's a former agent, become general manager, whether he has the tact to communicate with him. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if this guy here doesn't provide Luis Rojas the horses, then you got to wonder how big of a leash he's on before he's on the hot seat.
Yeah, it's crazy how much we criticize Brody, and a lot of that came down to how him and the Wilpons handled things. But we can't forget the Mets won 86 games last year. They were in the playoff hunt until the end of the season. So Mickey Callaway, for all the crap that he had to go through in that New York media, he did a terrific job with that team. I mean, the 2 years he was manager, Jacob deGrom won 2 Cy Young Awards, and you saw the emergence of guys like Jeff McNeil. So you know what? I think that'll further benefit Mickey when he's with Joe Madden in L.A., when he's the pitching coach there. He's going to go back to doing something he loves, a smaller market, and he gets to watch Mike Trout play every day. So I'm glad he's out of Brody's shoes and clutches, and he's not his puppet anymore. He'll just be able to chill out there with Artie Moreno and do his thing. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it's not a bad living in Southern California if you can go ahead and get
Billy Epler, I'm sorry, Artie Moreno's the GM of Seattle Mariners.
Artie Moreno's the owner.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. And I'm thinking of Jerry DiPato, the GM of Seattle.
Whatever.
But you know what
he's with the Angels, man, or whatever. But yeah, I guess if you can get a job in Orange County near Disneyland and watch the Anaheim Ducks play, it isn't the worst thing in the world. I haven't been to Anaheim in ages. One of these days I will get back there. But no, Mickey Callaway landed in a good spot. He really, really did. So
one of the true good guys in the sport, too. I know you had a chance to speak to him in spring training a couple of years back as well.
Yeah. Well, listen, I had no problem with Mickey Callaway. Let's not lose sight of the fact that he had some pretty good coaches on that staff. You have Jim Riggleman, who I think is arguably one of the better baseball minds out there.
Old school
and then
guy,
Chuck Hernandez as well. So a lot of people and I go back many, many years with Chuck Hernandez with the Fort Lauderdale Yankees. So
yeah, and he was the big reason that Jose Fernandez kind of became who he was during his brief career with the Marlins. He was a pitching coach on those great teams. So, I mean, yeah, the Mets, they have good personnel on the field. It's just a matter of that front office is about as clean as a dirty kitchen. So, I mean, I don't know. But, yeah, look, with Dusty Baker, though, Dusty Baker was a great player during his career, and I'm sure you got to grow up and watch him play. You have a photo right there with, young 19-year-old right there with Tommy Lasorda. Dusty Baker was on those teams. They won the World Series in 1981. That's the only World Series he has. One thing keeping him out of the Hall of Fame, though, is one as a manager. He's won as a manager with the Giants, with the Cubs, but he's just never gotten to the promised land.
Well, that's true, too.
Close to the
and I think Dusty Baker should be in. Whether or not he gets in down the road is anybody's guess, but, I don't know. But, it is what it is. Nobody can say. Let me go over a few other headlines worth mentioning. Okay, and that being this. The NFL concussions are up slightly in 2019. In 2019, you had 224 of them. In 2018, they had 214. And in 2007, they had 281. Why am I bringing this up? Well, obviously, football season isn't quite over yet. Okay, and from 2015 to 2017, the average was 266.3. I guess what can be attributed to a lot of that is the NFL has reworked the kickoff rules, so it's illegal for players to go ahead and lower their heads to initiate contact with opponents, and touchbacks are more incentivized, where you can take the ball at the 25-yard line. So if you can eliminate some of those dangerous hits, then that's really, really, really important to do as well. Go ahead.
It gets to something that I feel like we've discussed on multiple episodes of this show, and that's this. I like that NFL is taking precautions to take the safety of their players into their hands, but they still need to, and I'm not sure where you and I stand on this in regards to mutual views, but I still think they need to institute better healthcare terms to ensure that these players have better careers off the field. Because even without it, football's a rough game, and you're going to get hit, and it's rough. I mean, Bill Winter's a freaking guest on the show, knows it better than anyone that we've ever talked to because he lived it, as does Michael Keller. They played it. So, I mean, it's a brutal game, but I'm glad they're taking steps like this. The concussions are down a little bit, which is a good thing compared to a few years back. But, we're never going to be perfect with it. We just got to keep tinkering with it, honestly. It's an ever-evolving thing.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. But, they're up 10. It's not like they're up a lot, but you still don't want to see that number go up.
Absolutely not, no.
And let me tell you, the NFL doesn't want to, because the last thing they need are any more lawsuits or anything like that with the amount of money that they've paid out. So, 281 in 2017 versus 224 should be the number that you really base it on during that period of time. The 10 in between from 2018 is another story altogether. Another football note I should mention, Gary Kubiak is a new defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings. Quarterback Kirk Cousins is in the final year of a 3-year contract at $84 million. That was a guaranteed contract. The Vikings finished 8th in scoring, 9th in third down percentage, and 16th in yards during the regular season. So Cousins, threw for 362 yards in a wild card win against the New Orleans Saints, but lost to San Francisco 6 times, and the offense only amassed 147 yards and a 27-10 loss. Well, they have to say that Gary Kubiak is one of the better coaches in pro football. He has a world championship under his belt with the Denver Broncos, and he's one of the most respected offensive minds out there. So when you talk about Kubiak, a 1-year deal, you got 1-1-1 across the board. Whether the Vikings part ways with Mike Zimmer is another story, but you've got basically Kubiak and Cousins 1 year. Let's see what happens with arguably one of the best offensive lines. And one of the few things that people got to realize is that Gary Kubiak was a backup to John Elway for a long time, and he did a pretty good job. I believe he was the coach of the Houston Texans.
Yeah, and I think, hiring a defensive-minded guy like Kubiak, and he was there with the Broncos when they had that great defense highlighted by Von Miller in the earlier part of the 2010s. I think that benefits them. I want to ask you this, though, because Cousins has they made one playoff in the 2 years that he's been there. I believe they had a sub-500 season, and they made the playoffs in 2019. How do you assess the validity of a contract and justify its worth? Now, say they go to the playoffs next year and they lose, that's 2 playoff appearances in 3 years. Would you say that Kirk Cousins' contract with Minnesota is justified, being that they made 2 playoff appearances, or do you think a Super Bowl is truly what puts the cherry on top to making that contract grand slam, home run, win, Hail Mary, whatever you want to call it?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of trains for thought here in terms of what you're dealing with, and I think that when you read the sum of the whole, you figure that out yourself. How would you answer that question?
I mean, I just look at a guy who, one, he can't win on Mondays. He obviously struggled in that game against San Francisco. He got shut down by the defense. But that also makes me think of, how's Mahomes going to do in the Super Bowl? Because he's going up against a good defense, great quarterback. I would say that, Kirk Cousins is an above-average quarterback. I wouldn't necessarily say he's great because, again, we've said it. He's 0-10 on Monday Night Football. He obviously can't get past the divisional round in the playoffs. We saw that with the Redskins when he was with Jay Gruden. We saw that, and we saw that with Minnesota after they beat the Saints in that surprising wild card win. I mean, again, if he has 2 playoff appearances in 3 years, I'm asking you personally, how would you assess that contract? Would you say it's a win for the Vikings, or would you say it's just another example of them going to the playoffs and again they don't win the same way?
No, it's a 3-year deal. The contract plays out. You're bringing it back 3 years.
Yeah.
I don't like contracts really to be much more than 3 or 4 years anyhow, because in many instances what will end up happening is, they're going to have to restructure a contract and give money back. I think the Vikings feel that it's not like he hasn't outperformed the contract. He's a good quarterback. He really is. I mean, they have a running game. Well, let's face it, they lost to the San Francisco 49ers, a heck of a football team. They really are.
Yeah, and to beat the Saints, I think, says a lot. But I don't believe they've ever won a Super Bowl. So, to say Kirk Cousins would be that guy to do it would be important. I believe Dalvin Cook is a free agent coming up, and that's something we haven't really discussed. It's really going to affect Kirk Cousins. We're going to see him do what Eli Manning had to do the last few years of his career, where he really didn't have a run game until Saquon Barkley was drafted, where he's going to have to throw a lot more. However, I think that, if there's a little bit of restructuring that needs to be done with Cousins' contract, they would do it to ensure that Cook is back, because that's a dynamic 1-2 punch right there.
Well, it is. But again, the way NFL contracts are, everybody's basically on a 1-year contract. Mm-hmm. They can get, like Bill Winters will tell you, they can spit you up all day long, okay, and get rid of you on a moment's notice. If you can see a guy that lasts 5 to 10 years in the league, you're doing awfully good.
Yeah,
you really are.
Yeah, their contracts are kind of just like, what have you done for me lately?
Right.
That's why when Ndamukong Suh signed with the Dolphins, that wasn't fully guaranteed.
Right.
Again, yeah, you're right. You are performing on a 1-year basis, and in some instances they'll give you some leeway because they still think that contract can work out. Someone coming to a new team, they're adjusting. We saw that with Cousins because they weren't a great team that first year he was there. And now, obviously they turned it around 10-6. They're a playoff team. But, again, they need to really do something next year for me to think that contract was justified. It can invigorate a fan base, but for somebody like Minnesota who's gone to the playoffs a myriad of times and continually had their hearts broken, you want to go a step further. And, I don't think anybody would disagree with that because...
No, they wouldn't. But the reality is Ndamukong Suh made a lot of money. The one thing every NFL player will tell you, it's all about the guaranteed money up front, not the face of the contract. Mm-hmm. Just remember that, the guaranteed money. And remember, when you break down an NFL contract, what you also have to understand is the agent gets paid, okay?
Oh, yeah.
And
you're not seeing all of that.
The agent gets paid, okay? You're paying a lot of money with taxes, and a lot of these are independent contractors. So if you don't invest your money wisely, most of these guys end up broke.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, he definitely won't be struggling for food, scrounging pennies together.
No, well, you'd like to think that's the case, but
no,
that's not necessarily the case. And while we have the opportunity to talk about it, one guy that may be scrounging for bread and water is Antonio Brown.
Yeah, we were talking, you had something that you and Bill agreed upon prior to the show when we were doing our pre-production about where you think his head's at mentally.
Well, mentally, I'll be honest with you, and Bill will tell you this too, and we'll address it another time. I think, and I hate bringing this word up because it really isn't something I really care for, but I think Bill nails it. Antonio Brown is the type of guy that could very well commit suicide. He's in such disarray. Think about it for a minute, okay? You can't put numbers into mind here when you realize that how much money he's lost this year. He gave it away with Oakland, okay? Botched another opportunity with New England, made an idiot out of himself, okay, New Orleans, and he didn't get any of that money back.
And he's also 31, and we have to remember that speed doesn't age well regardless
of
but
whether you're 31 and you're talented is one thing, okay? But this guy's had more lives than Morris, who had 9.
Yeah, I mean, he's had more lives than Elizabeth Taylor had husbands, too. So, I mean, it's crazy. Like, what I'm saying, in regards to his mental health, and that's where you and Bill kind of came to that conclusion,
right.
It's going to, mental health isn't something that you can kind of just flip a switch overnight. Sure, there's medications for it, but there's multiple programs. At least, when we talked about this, when we talked about him a couple weeks ago, Brandon Marshall, who has struggled with borderline personality disorder, came out and was adamant about it. He started doing activist work, and he sought help for himself because he had off-the-field issues of, domestic abuse. He got arrested. But it took him a couple of years, and he came back and he reclaimed his spot. Where Antonio Brown is at now, I think this is at a level far worse because Brandon Marshall was never saying and doing things that Antonio Brown was doing, cursing out police officers where the whole world can see it on the internet, making yourself look like a fool. He's also 31. You take 2 to 3 years to do that, and you haven't played essentially a full season since 2018.
Right.
Who's going to want you? I understand statistically, his numbers are Hall of Fame worthy, but he's totally destroyed his reputation. Granted, we don't know how much you can attribute that to him because mental health is something that is genetic and it's something that you inherit, but he may have taken so many hits during his career on the field.
Well, I mean, that's something you'll never know way down the road when the man passes away
unfortunately.
With the CTE. Mm-hmm. But this guy here, forget about where he's gone this year. Okay, if you can't play for Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers, there's something wrong.
Oh, yeah.
There really is. Mike Tomlin is a very players-friendly coach, is what he is. And you know what? The Pittsburgh Steelers, don't lose sight of this. they were able to play well without Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown this year. Life did not fall apart for the Steelers at all, Lewis. They went on about their business is what they did. And